Imagine being 14 years old. You've spent the entire day in a cathedral, wearing a dress so heavy you can barely breathe. A man you've met 3 times has placed a ring on your finger. A bishop has blessed your union. Hundreds of guests have watched you eat food you couldn't taste. Now the feast is ending. Your mother appears at your shoulder. Her face is pale. Her hands are trembling. "It's time," she whispers. "The bedding will begin." You don't understand what that means. Not yet. You'll lead down a corridor toward a bedchamber. Not alone with your new husband. With a crowd, 12 witnesses file in behind you. Noblemen, priests, your own mother. They arrange themselves around the bed. Some sit, some stand. None of them leave. Then you notice something in the corner of the room. A basin, white linen cloths folded beside it, and something else, a small wooden box that one of the older women is holding. She hasn't opened it yet, but she keeps glancing at it. He keeps glancing at you. You don't know what's inside that box. By morning, you'll wish you never found out. Then the women step forward, your ladies-in-waiting, your mother's friends. They begin unlacing your dress, in front of everyone. You're 14. You've never been naked in front of anyone, and now you're standing in candlelight while strangers remove every piece of clothing you own. When you're finally in bed, shivering beneath thin sheets, someone closes the curtains around you. But the witnesses don't leave. They stand outside the curtains, listening, waiting, and in the morning they'll inspect the sheets. This wasn't abuse, this wasn't a crime. This was a wedding night in medieval Europe, blessed by the church, required by law, witnessed by everyone who mattered. They called it the bedding ceremony. And for over 500 years, no noble bride escaped it. This is the ritual the church doesn't want you to know about, not because it was done against their teachings, because it was done with their blessing. Priests officiated, bishops witnessed, holy water sanctified beds where teenage girls would lose their virginity to men they barely knew. The church didn't hide this ritual because it was shameful. They hid it because it reveals something uncomfortable. That controlling women's bodies was unto sin in medieval Christianity. It was a sacrament. Over the next 25 minutes, you're going to follow one bride through her wedding night. You're going to see what the witnesses saw. You're going to understand why mothers wept while dressing their daughters. And you're going to learn why the church spent centuries erasing every record of what happened in those bedchambers. Before we go deeper, if hidden horrors of the past fascinate you, subscribe to the Obscure Chronicles and hit the like button. And once you reach the moment that unsettles you most, tell me in the comments. Now let's go back to 1385. To a castle in Burgundy. To a girl named Marguerite who has no idea what's about to happen to her. Her name was Marguerite de Chalon. She was 14 years old, the daughter of a minor French nobleman with more ambition than money. Her father had spent 3 years negotiating this marriage, 3 years of letters, bribes, and careful calculations. The groom was Philippe de Vienne, 42 years old, a widower whose first wife had died screaming in childbirth. He needed an heir. Marguerite's family needed his land. No one asked Marguerite what she needed, but here's the detail that changes everything about her story. Marguerite had been raised in a convent. From age 7 to 14, she had lived among nuns, learning to read, to embroider, to pray. She had never been alone with a man who wasn't a priest. She had never seen a man's body. She had never been told what happened between husbands and wives. The nuns considered such knowledge unnecessary. After all, her mother would explain everything before the wedding. Her mother arrived 2 days before the ceremony. She had exactly 48 hours to explain to her daughter what marriage would require, according to a letter preserved in the Bibliothèque nationale de France, written by Marguerite decades later to her own daughter. The conversation lasted less than an hour. "She told me I would bleed," Marguerite wrote. "She told me it would hurt. She told me to be silent and still and let my husband do what he must." Then her mother began to cry and could not stop. That was all the preparation Marguerite received. No one told her about the witnesses. No one told her about the sheets. No one told her that her body would become evidence, examined and documented like a deed of land. The wedding itself was everything a medieval ceremony should be. High Mass at the Cathedral of St. Etienne, hundreds of guests, a feast that lasted 7 hours. Musicians, jugglers, a performing bear that terrified the children. Marguerite sat beside her new husband at the high table, wearing a dress embroidered with gold thread that her father had borrowed money to afford. She smiled when she was supposed to smile, and as the candles burned lower and the wine flowed faster, she watched the guests begin to whisper. They were looking at her, pointing, some of them laughing. She didn't understand why, not until her mother appeared at her shoulder and spoke 3 words that ended her childhood. The bedding will begin. The bedding ceremony was not a secret ritual performed in shadows. It was the most public part of a medieval wedding, and that was entirely the point. In an era without DNA tests, blood work, or reliable record-keeping, marriage was simply a claim. Anyone could say they were married. Anyone could say a child was legitimate. Without proof, inheritance disputes could tear families apart for generations. So medieval society created proof. Witnesses, documentation, physical evidence. The bedding ceremony provided all 3. Here's how it worked. When the feast ended, usually near midnight, the bride was escorted from the great hall by a procession of women, her mother, her ladies-in-waiting, the wives of important guests. They led her through torchlit corridors while the men remained behind. The men stayed to sing. The songs had names: chivalry in France, rough music in England. Verses so explicit that modern translations often censor them. Lyrics describing exactly what the groom was expected to do, in terms that would make a sailor blush. Marguerite could hear them. Even through the stone walls, even through the heavy oak door, she could hear the men singing. She didn't understand all the words, but she understood enough. Her face burned with shame. Her mother squeezed her hand. "Don't listen," she whispered. "They're just songs." But they weren't just songs, they were instructions. And everyone in that castle knew exactly what they meant. The singing wasn't entertainment, it was pressure, a reminder to the groom that the entire community expected him to perform, that failure was not an option. While the men sang, the women undressed the bride. This wasn't gentle. This wasn't private. This was a ritual with specific requirements. According to court records from the marriage of Lady Margaret Beaufort to Edmund Tudor in 1455, the bride was stripped completely by her attendants, examined for deformities or blemishes that might have been hidden during negotiations, and then dressed in a thin linen shift that concealed nothing. Margaret Beaufort was 12 years old. Her mother supervised the examination personally, ensuring the groom's family could not later claim they had been deceived about the bride's body. The same records note that Margaret wept throughout but made no protest. She had been told not to protest. They were all told not to protest. Marguerite de Chalon stood in the center of the bridal chamber as her mother and 3 other women unlaced her wedding dress. She kept her eyes fixed on the wall, on a crack in the stone, on anything except the faces watching her. The dress fell away, then the undergarments, then everything. For a moment that lasted forever, she stood naked in candlelight while women she barely knew inspected her body. They checked her skin for marks. They examined her hips. They murmured to each other in tones she couldn't quite hear. Then they dressed her in a shift so thin she might as well have worn nothing at all. And they placed her in the bed. The sheets had been blessed by a priest that morning. Holy water had been sprinkled across the mattress. Prayers had been said over the pillows. The church's involvement wasn't reluctant, it was essential. A marriage without church blessing was no marriage at all. And the church had decided, centuries earlier, that blessing the bed was just as important as blessing the vows. Then came the groom's procession. The men burst through the door like a conquering army, their songs reaching a crescendo. They surrounded the bed where Marguerite lay trembling, and in front of everyone they stripped Felipe naked. The examination of the groom was briefer than the bride's, but his body was displayed nonetheless. Witnesses needed to confirm he was physically capable of consummation. In some regions, particularly Germanic territories, the groom was required to show evidence of arousal before being allowed into bed. If he couldn't perform on command, in front of drunk wedding guests, the marriage could be delayed. The pressure was deliberate. Medieval society left nothing to chance. Once both bride and groom were in bed, the priest stepped forward. Father Bernard had performed this ritual many times. He was the chaplain to the DVN family. He had blessed Philippe's first marriage bed. He had administered last rites to Philippe's first wife when she died, bringing a stillborn son into the world. He never looked at the brides. Not once in 30 years. Not ever. Eyes on God. He would tell younger priests who asked how he managed it. The girl is not your concern. The sacrament is your concern. The legitimacy of heirs is your concern. She is merely the vessel. Now he stood before the marriage bed, holy water in one hand, prayer book in the other, his eyes fixed firmly on the crucifix above the headboard. The holy water was cold. Marguerite flinched when drops landed on her bare shoulders. Father Bernard didn't notice or didn't care. The blessing of the marriage bed was codified in church law. The ritual varied by region, but the core elements were universal. First, the priest blessed the bed itself. Holy water across the sheets, the pillows, the curtains, prayers invoking God's blessing and asking for fertility. Then the priest blessed the couple. This is the part that disturbs modern readers most. According to liturgical texts preserved in the Vatican archives, the priest stood at the foot of the bed and recited prayers while the couple lay together beneath the sheets. In some versions, the priest would reach beneath the covers and join their hands, pressing their bodies together while invoking divine blessing. The prayer from a 14th century French missal reads, "Bless, O Lord, this bed and all who lie in it. May they be fruitful and multiply. May they perform the sacred duty of marriage without sin. May their union be blessed with children who will serve your church." The sacred duty of marriage, that was the phrase. Sex wasn't shameful, it was a duty, a requirement, something the church demanded and God blessed. After the blessing, Father Bernard closed the bed curtains. But he didn't leave, and neither did the witnesses. In noble marriages, witnesses remained in the room throughout the night. They sat in chairs arranged around the bed. They listened. They waited. They would later testify, under oath if necessary, that they had heard sounds consistent with consummation. This wasn't optional. Medieval law required proof of consummation before a marriage was considered valid. An unconsummated marriage could be annulled. An annulment meant the bride could be returned, the dowry reclaimed, the alliance dissolved. So the witnesses stayed, and they listened. Father Bernard took his position in a chair near the door. The other witnesses arranged themselves around the room. Someone extinguished most of the candles, leaving only a few flickering near the walls. In the darkness, Marguerite could hear them breathing. Then the curtains parted slightly, and Felipe climbed into bed beside her. He didn't speak. Neither did she. What happened next was not intimacy. It was not romance. It was a verification. And somewhere in the darkness, a dozen people listened to every sound. Marguerite would later write to her daughter, "I did not know what he would do. I lay as still as a corpse and prayed to the Virgin for protection. When it began, I bit my own hand to keep from screaming. I still have the scar." But Marguerite did something that night that no one expected. When Felipe finally fell asleep, when the witnesses had grown quiet in their chairs, she reached beneath her pillow and pulled out a small piece of parchment. She had hidden it there that morning, stolen from her father's study, along with a stub of charcoal wrapped in cloth. In the darkness, while her husband snored and the witnesses dozed, she began to write. Not a letter, not a prayer, just words, fragments, what she had felt, what she had endured, what she never wanted to forget. She hid the parchment in her shift before dawn, before the women came to inspect the sheets. She would keep writing for the rest of her life, scraps of parchment hidden in prayer books, notes tucked inside embroidery, a secret record of everything she had been taught to never speak aloud. That collection of fragments would survive for 600 years, and it's the reason we know her story today. Dawn came slowly. Marguerite had not slept. She had lain awake for hours, listening to the witnesses shift in their chairs, listening to Felipe's snore beside her, feeling the wetness and the pain between her legs. When the first gray light crept through the shutters, she heard movement. The witnesses were waking. Then came the moment she had been dreading. The curtains opened. Two women stepped forward. Older women, experienced in these matters. One of them carried the wooden box. Now Marguerite understood what was inside. Linen cloth for collecting evidence, a small vial for preserving samples. Tools she didn't recognize and didn't want to understand. The women pulled back the sheets without asking permission, without acknowledging Marguerite as anything more than evidence to be examined. They were looking for blood, the physical proof of virginity lost. the stain that would confirm the marriage had been consummated, the evidence that Marguerite had been intact before her wedding night. In the bright morning light, with a dozen witnesses watching, they found what they were looking for. One of the women nodded to Father Bernard. The priest made a note in his records. The marriage was valid, but the ritual wasn't finished. In many noble households, the bloodied sheet was preserved, sometimes displayed publicly, hung from a window for the entire household to see, sometimes stored in family archives as proof that could be produced decades later. The marriage of Marguerite de Chalon and Philippe de Vienne was recorded in church documents, family records, and legal contracts. But the sheet was the real proof. The sheet was what mattered. Here's the part they didn't tell anyone. Not all virgins bleed. Medical historians now estimate that only about half of women experience significant bleeding during first intercourse. The hymen is not a seal that breaks. It's a membrane that stretches. Some women are born with almost no hymenal tissue at all. Medieval midwives didn't know this. Medieval priests didn't know this. Medieval families didn't know this. So for centuries, countless brides were accused of impurity, had their marriages annulled, had their lives destroyed, all because their bodies didn't produce the blood the ritual demanded. According to court records from medieval Spain, brides whose sheets showed insufficient blood could face additional examination. Midwives would inspect the bride's body for signs of prior corruption. If the midwives found anything suspicious, signs that were often ambiguous, often misinterpreted, the marriage could be annulled. The bride could be returned to her family in disgrace. In some cases, she could face criminal prosecution for fraud. A teenage girl's entire future depended on whether she bled enough, and the church said nothing, because the ritual wasn't about truth, it was about control. If minor nobles endured the bedding ceremony, imagine what royal brides faced. The marriage of a princess was never private, it was a matter of state. Treaties depended on it. Alliances hung in the balance. The legitimacy of future kings would be traced back to a single night. Consider Catherine of Aragon in 1501. At age 15, she married Arthur, Prince of Wales, the heir to the English throne, the future king. Their bedding ceremony was witnessed by the Bishop of London, multiple lords of the realm, and ladies representing both English and Spanish courts. Catherine was stripped, examined, blessed, and placed in bed beside a boy she'd met weeks before. Arthur was also 15. By some accounts, he was terrified. The witnesses remained until they heard sounds they considered sufficient. Then they withdrew to the antechamber, listening for any disturbance throughout the night. In the morning, the sheets were examined. The marriage was declared valid. But then Arthur died, just 5 months later. And here's where the bedding ceremony becomes historically catastrophic. When Henry VII proposed that Catherine marry his youngest son, the future Henry VIII, the question of consummation became critical. Church law forbade a man from marrying his brother's widow. But if the first marriage had never been consummated, Catherine could be declared a virgin. The new marriage could proceed. Catherine swore, under oath, that her marriage to Arthur had never been consummated, that despite the bedding ceremony, despite the witnesses, despite the examined sheets, Arthur had never completed the act. The witnesses were questioned. Their testimony was contradictory. Some said they'd heard sounds consistent with intercourse. Some said they couldn't be sure. For 20 years, Catherine maintained her claim. Then Henry wanted a divorce. He wanted Anne Boleyn. He wanted a son. Suddenly, the question of what happened on that wedding night in 1501 became the most important political issue in England. The witnesses from the bedding ceremony, now elderly, were summoned again. What did they hear? What did they see? What did the sheets show? The entire English Reformation can be traced back to a bedding ceremony. The break with Rome, the dissolution of the monasteries, the creation of the Church of England. All of it began with a question about blood on sheets and witnesses who could agree on what they'd heard behind closed curtains 40 years before. That's the power the Church gave these rituals. The power to legitimize or destroy, the power to make or break kingdoms, and they wielded it deliberately. Isabella of Valois was 7 years old when she was married to Richard II of England in 1396-7. The bedding ceremony was performed symbolically. the witnesses recording that the marriage would be consummated when the bride reaches suitable age, but Isabella was still placed in a bed beside her adult husband, still examined, still documented. She never forgot it. Years later, when Richard was murdered and she was pressured to marry his successor, she refused. She returned to France and entered a convent rather than face another wedding night. The ritual had done its work. It showed her exactly what marriage meant. By the 17th century, the bedding ceremony was dying, not because the church condemned it, not because women demanded change, but because it became unfashionable. The rise of Protestant modesty, the Enlightenment's emphasis on privacy, the slow evolution of marriage from property transfer to romantic partnership, all these forces combined to make the ritual seem barbaric, and so it was quietly abandoned. In England, the last recorded royal bedding ceremony occurred in 1734. By the time Victoria married Albert in 1840, the very idea of witnesses in the bedroom would have been scandalous. The ritual didn't end with a declaration. It simply faded away. And as it faded, the records were buried. The church, which had blessed these ceremonies for centuries, began to pretend they had never happened. Liturgical texts describing the blessing of marriage beds were removed from prayer books. Instructions for priests were deleted. Testimonies of witnesses were sealed in archives. If you search modern Catholic teaching on marriage, you'll find nothing about the bedding ceremony, nothing about witnesses, nothing about sheet inspections. It's as if 500 years of ritual never occurred, but the evidence survives. In letters like Marguerite's and court records from disputed marriages, in the confused testimonies of elderly witnesses, and the stories passed down through families. Stories of mothers who wept while undressing their daughters. Stories of brides who bit their hands to keep from screaming. Stories of women who never spoke about their wedding nights, not because they had forgotten but because they could never forget. Marguerite de Chalon lived to be 63 years old. She bore Philippe 5 children to survive to adulthood. She managed his estates during his illness. She supervised his funeral. She spent her final years in a convent, the same convent where she had grown up. In her last letter to her daughter, written weeks before her death, she offered one piece of advice about the wedding night that awaited. When the witnesses enter, look at the wall. Choose a single stone. Fix your eyes upon it. Do not look at the faces. Do not listen to the voices. Go somewhere else inside your mind. She paused, then added, "Your body is theirs for the night, but your thoughts can be your own." She signed the letter with her name and a phrase that still haunts me. May God forgive what was done in his name. The bedding ceremony lasted over 500 years. Thousands of brides, hundreds of thousands of girls as young as 7, stripped by strangers, blessed by priests, watched by witnesses, examined in morning light. The church called it sacred. Society called it necessary. Families called it tradition. No one asked the brides what they called it. That's what makes this history so uncomfortable. It wasn't done by villains. It wasn't done in secret. It was done by mothers who loved their daughters, by priests who believed they were serving God, by witnesses who thought they were protecting the social order. Everyone believed they were doing the right thing, and that's far more disturbing than simple cruelty. Because it means monstrous things don't require monsters. They only require ordinary people who have decided that someone else's suffering is acceptable, necessary, even holy. The church hid this ritual not because they were ashamed of what was done. They hid it because they were ashamed of what it revealed about them. For 500 years, no one protected those girls. Not their mothers who wept but said nothing. Not their fathers who negotiated their bodies like livestock. Not the priests who blessed the beds where their innocence was taken. No one. And when it was finally over, no one apologized. No one acknowledged the suffering. No one admitted it had happened. They just stopped talking about it. That's what power does with an uncomfortable history. It doesn't confess. It doesn't repent. It falls silent and waits for everyone to forget. But Marguerite didn't forget. The women who wrote letters didn't forget. The witnesses who gave testimony didn't forget. And now, neither will you. If this story stays with you, subscribe to the Obscure Chronicles. For the brides who were never asked, for the girls who fixed their eyes on the wall, for the mothers who wept while fixing their daughters' hair. They endured in silence. the least we can do is remember. But the church wasn't the only institution that turned women into property. In ancient Rome, when a gladiator won in the arena, the crowd didn't just throw coins, they threw something else. Someone else. Female slaves were the ultimate prize, and what happened to them in the tunnels beneath the Colosseum was worse than anything that happened on the sand above. Next video. What Roman gladiators did to female slaves after winning.